The sun hung low over the jagged peaks of the Wyoming Rockies, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the snow-dusted plains. It was late autumn, but winter had arrived early this year, blanketing the land in a crisp white shroud that muffled the world's sounds and amplified the isolation. Clara Hawthorne trudged through the drifts, her boots sinking with each labored step, the bundle of firewood strapped to her back pulling her down like an anchor. At 32, she was no stranger to hardship, a widowed young, left to fend for herself on a homestead that had once been a dream shared with her husband, Tom. But today, the weight felt heavier than ever, not just from the log she chopped herself from the edge of the pine forest, but from the invisible burdens that had piled up over the years: loneliness, grief, and the relentless grind of survival in a land that forgave no weakness. Her breath came in visible puffs, mingling with the chill air that nipped at her cheeks, turning them a raw pink. The scarf wrapped around her neck was frayed, a remnant from better days when Tom had gifted it to her on their first anniversary. She adjusted the load, wincing as a splinter dug into her palm through her worn gloves. The cabin was visible now, a squat structure of weathered logs huddled against a copse of aspens, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. It was home, but it felt more like a prison these days, a place where memories echoed too loudly and the night stretched into eternity. Clara paused for a moment, leaning against a fence post half buried in snow, her mind drifting back to the day Tom had died. A sudden storm, a horse spooked by thunder, and just like that, he was gone, thrown from the saddle. His neck snapped on impact. No time for goodbyes. No final words. Just an empty bed in the ranch that demanded more than one person could give. Shaking off the reverie, she pushed forward, determined not to let the cold seep into her resolve. The firewood was essential. Without it, the stove would go out, and the cabin would turn into an icebox by morning. She'd learned to chop wood, mend fences, and even hunt small game in the months following Tom's death, skill she'd never imagined needing as a city girl transplanted to this wild frontier. Born in Chicago, she'd met Tom during a rare visit to relatives out west, enchanted by his rugged charm and tales of open skies. They'd married quickly, passionately, and she'd followed him here, trading bustling streets for endless horizons. But passion couldn't stave off reality, and now, 2 years later, she was a shadow of that wide-eyed bride, her once vibrant auburn hair dulled by sun and sorrow, her green eyes etched with lines of fatigue. As she crested a small rise, the bundle shifted precariously, one log tumbling free and rolling down the slope. Clara cursed under her breath, a sharp expletive that cut through the silence like a knife. She knelt to retrieve it, her knees protesting against the frozen ground, but as she reached out, another log slipped, then another, until half her load lay scattered in the snow. Frustration boiled over into tears that froze on her lashes before they could fall. "Damn it all," she muttered, pounding a fist into the snow. It was moments like these that tested her the most, and not the big storms or the lean harvests, but the small defeats that chipped away at her spirit. That's when she heard it, the soft crunch of hooves on snow, steady and approaching. Clara's head snapped up, her hand instinctively going to the small knife she kept in her boot. Strangers were rare in these parts, and not all were friendly. Bandits, drifters, or worse, men who saw a lone woman as an opportunity. She squinted against the glare of the setting sun, making out a silhouette on horseback, broad-shouldered and cloaked in a long duster coat dusted with frost. The horse was a sturdy bay, its mane braided against the wind, and the rider sat tall, exuding an aura of quiet command. He reined in a few yards away, the horse snorting plumes of steam. "Even in, ma'am," he called, his voice deep and resonant, carrying a drawl that spoke of southern roots transplanted to the west. "Looks like you could use some help with that load." Clara stood slowly, brushing snow from her skirts, her wariness sharpening her tone. "I'm managing just fine, thank you." "No need for concern." The man dismounted with fluid grace, his boots hitting the ground without a sound. He was taller than she'd expected, easily over 6 feet, with a frame honed by years of hard labor. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a black Stetson, but she caught glimpses, a strong jaw shadowed by stubble, eyes the color of aged whiskey, and a scar that curved faintly along his left cheekbone, a memento from some forgotten brawl or accident. He wore leather gloves and a bandana around his neck, practical gear for a cowboy, but there was something more to him, an air of solitude that mirrored her own. "Didn't mean to intrude," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Name's Eli Blackwood. I'm ranchin' a spread about 10 miles west of here. Saw you from the ridge and figured it ain't right to let someone struggle when help's at hand." Clara eyed him suspiciously, her grip tightening on the knife handle in her pocket. "Blackwood? I've heard the name. You the one who bought out the old Harlan place last spring?" He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That'd be me." Harlan was getting on in years. Wanted to head back east. I took it over, cattle and all. Been fixin' it up since. She relaxed marginally, recalling snippets of gossip from her rare trips to town. Blackwood was known as a fair man, solitary but honest, not one for trouble. Still, caution was her ally. "Well, Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate the offer, but I've been handling things on my own for a while now." "No offense, none taken," he replied, but instead of mounting up, he bent down and began gathering the scattered logs, his movements efficient and unhurried. "But seeing as I'm already here, might as well make myself useful. These winters don't play favorites." Clara watched him for a moment, torn between pride and practicality. The logs were heavy, and the light was fading. Refusing help might mean another trip to the woods in the dark. With a sigh, she joined him, stacking the wood back into a manageable bundle. Their hands brushed once, accidentally, and she pulled back as if burned, the contact a stark reminder of how long it had been since she'd felt another's touch. Together, they rebound the load, Eli using a length of rope from his saddlebag to secure it properly. "There," he said, stepping back. "That ought to hold. Want me to carry it the rest of the way?" She shook her head, though gratitude flickered in her eyes. "I can take it from here. Boat to Broken Bar, thank you." "Truly." He nodded, but his gaze lingered, taking in the weariness in her posture, the way her shoulders slumped under more than just physical weight. "You're the Hawthorne widow, ain't you?" "Heard about your husband. Sorry for your loss. This land takes too many good folks too soon." Clara's throat tightened at the mention of Tom, the sympathy in his voice unexpected and unwelcome in its rawness. "Yes, that's me, Clara Hawthorne. And thank you, but I don't need pity. Just firewood and a warm fire." Eli's expression softened, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. "Ain't pity, ma'am. Recognition. I lost my Surrey to fever 4 years back. Left me with the ranch in a hole that don't feel easy." The admission hung in the air, a bridge of shared sorrow that Clara hadn't anticipated. She studied him anew, seeing the lines around his eyes not just as marks of age but of grief. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That's a hard road." He shrugged, but the gesture lacked conviction. "It is, but we keep moving, don't we?" "No choice otherwise." They stood there in the gathering dusk, the wind whispering through the pines, carrying the scent of snow and earth. Clara felt an odd pull, a desire to speak more, to unburden the thoughts that had festered in silence. But vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Well, I best get inside before dark. Good night, Mr. Blackwood." "Eli," he corrected gently. "And if you ever need a hand of fence mending, Huntna my spread's not far. Just holler." She nodded, hoisting the bundle onto her back with renewed strength, and turned toward the cabin. As she walked, she glanced back once, seeing him remount his horse, a lone figure against the fading light. Something stirred in her chest, a warmth that battled the cold, but she pushed it down. Trust came slow in these parts, and hearts healed even slower. Inside the cabin, Clara dumped the wood by the stove, her arms aching with relief. The space was modest, a single room with a bed in one corner, a table scarred from years of use, and shelves lined with jars of preserved vegetables from her garden. She stoked the fire, watching the flames dance to life, their glow casting flickering shadows on the walls. As the warmth spread, she brewed a pot of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the air like an old friend. Sitting by the hearth, she let her mind wander back to Eli. What kind of man rode out in this weather just to help a stranger? Or was she not a stranger to him? Rumors traveled fast in small communities, and perhaps he'd heard of her plight. The night deepened, stars piercing the velvet sky outside her window. Clara undressed slowly, slipping into her nightgown, the fabric cool against her skin. She climbed into bed, pulling the quilts tight, but sleep evaded her. Instead, memories flooded in, Tom's laughter echoing in the barn, his hands calloused but gentle on her waist as they danced to No Music Under the Moon. And now, Eli's voice, low and steady, offering not just help but a glimpse of kinship. She turned over, burying her face in the pillow, willing the thoughts away. Tomorrow would bring Caressa feeding the chickens, checking the trap saw, and no time for fanciful notions. Miles away, Eli Blackwood rode through the darkness, his horse picking its way along familiar trails. The Harlan Ranch now his hill was a sprawling affair, 200 acres of pasture, a sturdy barn, and a house that still echoed with the ghosts of its previous owners. He'd come west from Texas after Sarah's death, seeking a fresh start in the unforgiving beauty of Wyoming. The work kept him busy, herding cattle, repairing equipment, negotiating with suppliers in town. But the evenings were the hardest, when the silence pressed in, reminding him of the family they'd never had, the dreams cut short by illness. Tonight, though, his mind was on Clara. He'd seen her from afar before, a determined figure tending her land, but up close, she was more than the widow the townsfolk whispered about. There was fire in her eyes, resilience in her stance, and a beauty that time and trial hadn't dimmed. Helping her hadn't been planned. He'd been scouting for stray cattle when he spotted her struggle, but something compelled him to intervene, a pull he couldn't quite name. Arriving home, he stabled his horse, brushing it down with methodical strokes. The barn smelled of hay and leather, a comforting constant. Inside the house, he lit a lamp, the flame illuminating a space as sparse as Clara's, a few books on a shelf, a rifle mounted on the wall, and a photograph of Sarah, her smile frozen in time. He poured a glass of whiskey, sinking into a chair by the fire, and let the burn chase away the cold. "What am I doing?" he murmured to the empty room. At 35, he'd resigned himself to solitude, but meeting Clara stirred embers he thought long extinguished. The next morning dawned clear and bitter, frost glittering on every surface like diamonds. Clara rose early, her breath visible in the chill air of the cabin. She dressed in light Ursa wool pants, flannel shirt, heavy coat up, and stepped outside to tend the animals. The chickens clucked indignantly as she scattered feed, and the milk cow lowed from the small barn. As she milked, her thoughts returned to Eli. His offer of help lingered, tempting but dangerous. Independence was her shield. Relying on others invited disappointment or worse. By midday, the sun had warmed the air slightly, melting the top layer of snow into slush. Clara decided to venture into the forest for more wood, her axe slung over her shoulder. The pines towered above, their branches heavy with snow, and the path was familiar, worn by her frequent trips. She selected a fallen tree, its trunk weathered, and began chopping, the rhythmic thwack echoing through the woods. Sweat beaded on her brow despite the cold, and she paused to catch her breath, leaning on the axe handle. That's when she heard the snap of a twig, sharp and close. Her head whipped around, heart pounding. A deer, or something more sinister? She gripped the axe tighter, scanning the trees. Nothing. Shaking off the unease, she resumed work, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Minutes later, another sound of hooves. This time, emerging from the underbrush was Eli, leading his horse, a rifle slung across his back. "Mornin', Clara," he said, using her first name as if it were natural. "Didn't mean to startle you. Was tracking a coyote that's been sniffing around my herd. Trail led this way." She lowered the axe, relief mingling with irritation. "Eli, you seem to have a habit of appearing when I'm least expecting it." He chuckled, a low rumble that eased the tension. "Coincidence, I swear. But since I'm here, let me help with that tree. Looks like a stubborn one." She hesitated, but the logic was sound. Two hands were better than one. They worked side by side, Eli's strength making quick work of the trunk. As they split the logs, conversation flowed tentatively about the weather, the price of grain in town, the challenges of ranching alone. Clara found herself opening up, sharing stories of her life before Wyoming, the culture shock of moving from city to country. "You must think me foolish," she said, stacking a log, "leaving everything behind for love." Eli shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ain't foolish. Brave, maybe." "Sarah and I started in Texas, small farm. Fever took her quick. I came north to outrun the memories, but they follow like shadows." His vulnerability mirrored hers, and for the first time in years, Clara felt seen, not pitied. They finished the chopping, loading the wood onto a sled Eli had fashioned from branches. As they pulled it back to her cabin, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. At the door, Eli unloaded the sled, stacking the wood neatly. "There, that should last you a spell." "Thank you," Clara said, meaning it. "Would you a broken bar like to come in? I have stew on the stove." He paused, surprise flickering in his eyes. "I'd like that." Inside, the cabin felt warmer with company. They ate at the table, the stew hearty with venison and root vegetables. Conversation deepened. Eli spoke of his childhood on a cattle drive, the adventures and hardships. Clara shared tales of Chicago's bustling markets, the theaters and lights that seemed a world away. As evening fell, Eli rose to leave. "Best be heading back, but Clay, a broken bar, this was nice, real nice." She walked him to the door, the air charged with unspoken possibilities. It was. "Ride safe, Eli." He mounted up, tipping his hat. "Will do." "See you soon." She smiled, a genuine one. "Maybe." As he rode away, Clara closed the door, her heart lighter. The burden of firewood was gone, but more importantly, the burden of isolation felt shared, if only for a moment. Days turned into weeks, the winter deepening its grip. Snowstorms raged, confining Clara to her cabin, where she mended clothes and read by lamplight. But Eli became a fixture in her thoughts, his visits sporadic but welcome. He'd appear with supplies from Tona flour, salt, or to help with heavy tasks. One afternoon, during a brief thaw, he arrived with a gift, a pair of new gloves, soft leather to replace her tattered ones. "Thought you could use these," he said, handing them over. Clara accepted, touched. "You didn't have to." "I know, but I wanted to." Their interactions grew intimate, laced with lingering glances and accidental touches. Clara found herself confiding in him about her fears of the ranch failing, the loneliness consuming her. Eli shared his own demons, the guilt over Sarah's death, wondering if he could have done more. One evening, as a blizzard howled outside, Eli sought shelter at her cabin, his horse lame from the ice. They sat by the fire, sharing whiskey from a flask. The warmth loosened tongues, and Eli spoke of his dreams, a family, a legacy. "I thought that door closed with Sarah," he admitted, staring into the flames. Clara reached out, her hand covering his. "Maybe it's not closed. Maybe it's just waiting." Their eyes met, and in that moment, barriers crumbled. Eli leaned in, his lips brushing hers tentatively. Then with growing passion, Clara responded, years of pent-up emotion surging forth. They moved to the bed, clothes shedding like cold skins, bodies entwining in a dance of need and healing. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Eli whispered, "I didn't plan this." "Neither did I," Clara replied, her head on his chest. "But it feels right." As the storm raged on, they talked of futures, of merging ranches, of building something together. But dawn brought reality. Eli's horse recovered, and he had to return home. "I'll be back," he promised, kissing her forehead. Clara watched him go, hope blooming amidst the snow. Yet doubt lingered. What if this was fleeting? What if the land took him too? Weeks passed, their relationship deepening with stolen moments. Eli helped expand her garden, taught her to track game. Clara visited his ranch, marveling at its scale, helping with branding calves. But tension brewed, rumors in town of rustlers targeting isolated spreads. One night, Clara heard noises outside. Hooves, voices. She grabbed her rifle, heart racing. Bursting out, she confronted shadows, but they fled. Telling Eli the next day, he frowned. "I've heard talk. Bandits from Montana. I'll stay vigilant." Their bond strengthened through adversity. During a cattle drive, Eli invited Clara along, teaching her the ropes. The trail was grueling, but sharing it forged unbreakable ties. Back home, as spring hinted at arrival, Clara realized her feelings had blossomed into love. Over dinner, she confessed, "Eli, you've shared more than my burdens. You've shared your heart, and I want to share mine."